me see. Last Sunday, we looked at Genesis chapter 24, and we noted something vital there. Even though the narrative was highly focused on the romance and the marriage between Isaac and Rebekah, in the grander scheme, it was still Abram's story. More importantly, it was God's story, God actively fulfilling his earlier promise to Abraham back in chapter 17. We saw in Genesis 22 that God uses tapestry of agency to get his work done, right? He uses the extraordinary, but he also uses mundane and ordinary. And he uses now human hands and feet, their demeanors and behaviors to accomplish his divine will. So today we step into this Genesis chapter 25, and this chapter now marks the end of Abram's journey. But as we will see in this chapter, it isn't just a somber obituary. It is a somewhat a masterclass, I think, in how God brings a human life to its conclusion, steeped in blessings and saturated in fulfillment, and also anchored in a promise that outlines the man Abram himself. It goes beyond his lifespan, right? From Genesis chapter 12 all the way to 25, we have been running alongside Abraham in his life. We have seen him stumble too. We have seen him doubt. But above all, we have seen that God was faithful through every single step of Abram's life. And today, we are going to see how God brings these threads of this complexity of life together, even in the moment of Abram's death. I want to highlight something today, though. This God of the Bible is not a passive spectator. He's a God who talks the talks and walks the walk with his people. And my prayer for us today is that we would be convinced enough by Abram's story from chapter 12 to 25 to step out onto the track and just start truly walking with God ourselves. You see, there was something unique about Abram's faith, I think, as I'm noticing, preparing a sermon. I'm noticing this. Abram was in the game the whole time. Abram was in the game the whole time. He didn't sit on the sidelines. He didn't quit when the terrain got rough or when the route didn't make sense. He didn't quit. This greed and the spiritual endurance that he shows, I think, to me, aligns with how the Apostle Paul describes the follower of Christ in 1 Corinthians 9. He says this: "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." Friends, let's be honest with ourselves for a moment. We live in a culture and the age that is absolutely crazy about the perishable wreath. We exhaust ourselves for things that fade eventually. We chase the promotion, the perfect image, the temporary security, the accolades that will eventually sit in a dusty box in the garage somewhere. But I get that. I do too. We all feel that pull and impulse, or the pressure, I guess, maybe. But my question is that are we equally or even more crazy about the imperishable wreath? Think about an elite runner. They don't just show up on a race day in flip-flops and hope for the best. They train. They exercise self-control. They monitor their cadence. They watch their pace. They study the map. And most importantly, they condition their minds and their hearts to ensure that when the wall of exhaustion hits them, they make sure they do not quit. And I guess my deepest hope for our community, and honestly, the cry of my heart has been that we become a people who do not stop until the race actually ends. I don't want us to start strong in Genesis 12, just to drop out by chapter 20. I don't want us to be disqualified from the race because we lost our discipline, lost our focus, or let our cadence falter. Just look at Abraham. Just read these 14 chapters. His race took over a century. Literally, God called him 75. He died at 175. A century. But he crossed the finish line with his boots on. Anyways, when we glanced at Genesis 25, you might think it's a bit of a downer because of death. On the surface, the text is crowded with streams of death and burial, but if you look at closely, there's marriage, there's birth, there's burial, both a burial and death, not just burial and death. It feels like a revolving door of generations happening in this short passage. But if you look even more closer, the underlying language of this passage isn't morbid at all. It's actually vibrantly about life. Listen to how Scripture records the final moments of Abraham and his firstborn son Ishmael, verses 8 and 17. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Same thing with Ishmael. These are the years of life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. Notice this phrase, gathered. They gathered to his people. In the ancient Near East, this wasn't just a polite or poetic euphemism to avoid using death. It reflected a theological reality they believed, the worldview. It was a concrete belief that death was not just a cessation of existence, but a transition. They believed that those who died were departing from this end of life to actively join those who had crossed over before them. Even though Abraham is biologically deceased, yes, it's true. His heart has stopped beating, yes. But textually and spiritually, his story doesn't end in a cold hole in the ground, I guess. His death is framed as an integration into the ongoing living and reality of God, God's covenant people. He's going to be with his people, actively joining with God's people there. He is gathered. He is brought home. So now we get it when Jesus said in Matthew 22, 31, 32, "And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham and God of Isaac, God of Jacob." He's not God of the dead, but of the living. Now we get it. But there is even more shocking details, I think, buried in the dirt of the burial narrative. Look at verse 9. "Isaac and Ishmael, his son, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, east of Mamre." Hold on a minute. Let's do a quick history check. If you flip back a few chapters before, remember what happened. In chapter 21, Hagar and Ishmael didn't exactly live on good terms. They were cast out into the harsh wilderness. There were intense family trauma, deep-seated resentment, a painful, heartbreaking division among the family. Sarah wanted Ishmael gone, and Abraham reluctantly sent him away into the wilderness. Yet here we are at Abram's funeral, and who is standing shoulder to shoulder at the mouth of the grave? Isaac and Ishmael. The text doesn't give us a dramatic or drawn-out reconciliation scene. It doesn't give us the dialogue or the tears, how it happened. I think, but the sheer, the historical reality of them standing together at the cave of Machpelah, which was the cave bought for Sarah, tells us everything we need to know. It goes even deeper. Verse 11. "After the death of Abraham, the God blessed Isaac, his son, and Isaac settled at Beir Lahai Roi." Beir Lahai Roi. Where have we heard that name before? Beir Lahai Roi. We have to go back to Genesis 16. It was a desolate place where the pregnant, weeping, and desperate Hagar fled from Sarah, first who abused her. It was there by the spring that the angel of the Lord met her. It was there that Hagar gave God a name, El Roi. You are a God of seeing. She said, "Truly here I have seen him who looks after me." And now one generation after, where does Isaac, Sarah's son, choose to build his home? He settles at Beir Lahai Roi. Do you see this geography of grace? Geography of grace happening. Isaac deliberately moves his household into the very territory where Ishmael's family lines were established by God's grace. He settles in close proximity to his estranged brother. I don't think this is a coincidence. And I think it's rather an implicit, yet powerful message we need to hear. I think it shows us that despite the ancient and deeply family feuds, and despite the bitter domestic warfare of the youth between Ishmael and Isaac, these two brothers found a path to shalom. They found peace. We don't know exactly how it happened. It more likely happened, materialized, manifest in the quiet years following Sarah's death, of course. But this restored a harmony between Isaac and Ishmael. I think it reveals the immense breadth of God's character, who God is, and what God is really bringing into family life beyond one's life. And as Bible readers, Christian readers, we have evangelical readers, we have I think a bad habit. We tend to look at Isaac as the exclusively chosen one, the golden goose of promise, and we completely erase Ishmael from the ledger of God's grace. We assume that because Ishmael wasn't the bearer of the specific covenantal line, he was abandoned by God. But Genesis 25, my friends, I think it shatters that assumption. Look at how Ishmael's life wraps up. His story is not a tragedy. God protected him in the desert earlier in chapter 21. God prospered him in the wilderness. And now his life closes surrounded by blessing, a dignity, and harmony with his relatives. He doesn't just survive. He thrives all his life. He becomes the father of a vast civilization. Even we see that the 12 princes come from his direct lineage. Exactly as God had promised Hagar years prior. What does that tell us about God we serve? God we worship. It tells us that our God is big enough to manage the specific line of his covenant promise through Isaac, while simultaneously pouring the immense grace, protection, and prosperity on Ishmael as well. God does not abandon people just because they aren't the main characters in our version of the story. So let me conclude. Friends, Abraham ran his race to the end. He stumbled through the valleys of fear, doubts. He climbed the mount of tears when he had to sacrifice his son. And he kept his stride all the way to the end. I think that's what I really want to say. And when he breathed his last, he left behind the legacy of unexpected peace between his children. He showed us what it looks like to pursue the imperishable wreath indeed. So as we go out into our week, after the worship ends and we go out this door, some of us are running on empty. Some of us are tempted to drop out of the marathon because the family dynamics are too messy. The hurt is too deep, I guess. Or your progress of faith feels too slow. But if Isaac and Ishmael can stand together at the cave of Machpelah, there is no relationship in your life, my life, and our life that is beyond, that reaches God's reconciling shalom. If God can watch over Ishmael in the forgotten, desolate place, he hasn't lost sight of you. He hasn't lost sight of me in your desolation and in your wilderness either. So let's keep our eyes on the imperishable wreath. Let's pace ourselves by His grace, steady our cadence, and resolve deeply within our souls. We're not stopping until the race is won. So let's pray.